All right. Ares Kingdoms, In Darkness at Last is, I believe it's their, is it their fifth album? Yeah, I think it's their fifth album. This is a band that had sort of started up after Order from Chaos had split in the late 90s. If you don't know who Order from Chaos is, you're probably going to be a little bit dead in the water, understanding why this is such a like an important and profound sort of project and record for my taste. Um, but consider the impact they had on early 90s black death metal and the impact that early extreme metal, thrash metal, extreme thrash, black death metal, those earliest ticks of it had on them, which we see very much so on this record. This, in a way, they're doing what they've always done. In a way, they were much more brutal on their previous album, Out of the Blue, kind of. It had been a while between albums. And this one, it reins in some of the, like the uh, hairier side of the production values for the sake of hitting a bit harder. And they get up to their usual business in a way, but they're just writing catchier songs. They're uh, pushing aside a lot more of the sort of straight thrash intricacies that they often play with, the sort of heavy metal notes, and they're pushing in a little bit more of uh, the rushes of sort of early metal punk. And it's not like this is not a Discharge album, but it ends up hitting in the same way that like a Slaughterlord or a Hellhammer record might, uh, at face value, where you get those big rhythms and those catchy songs where, you know what, like early Messiah, I think they have a song named Messiah where they just yell Messiah as the chorus. It's that barbaric and brutal, but then in between those moments where they're just shouting the peak of that verse or that chorus, um, there are very delicately written lyrics. And I mean delicately, it's very involved lyrics that have a lot of meaning behind them. It's not like he's reading out of a thesaurus to get through all of it, but he's screaming sentences where I think the vocalist has thought through what he's saying and what he's meaning, and he's not just barking like a dog. So uh, I think it's one of bassist vocalist Alec Bloom's one of my favorite performances from him, and I mean, he was on, he's been on some. I forget. He was on the last Perdition Temple record, maybe, or he was on. Yeah, yeah, I think it was the last two. Uh, so uh, basically, you get the sort of late '80s extreme metal in full out of this. You don't get a lot of like Morbid Angel necessarily, but sort of the um, a lot of the thrash metal, the black thrash, all those things that were sort of not defined yet, and that's always been Ares Kingdom's style. But here, literally, the reason this one hit me so hard is because it's so memorable, it's catchy, and it's just they belt this shit out like it's the end of the world, and I believed it. So they sold me on this album by sheer conviction alone, and by riffs. Songwriting is just fantastic. Like I don't have a deep thought to grace it with. It's just a great metal record, and I think for me that's all that I'm really looking for in at the end of the day. So the score might seem high, um, but it does come with the fact that I've been a fan for a long time. I think this is one of the very best records of the year. I think that it's memorable. It's uh, just the way that they put together this music is one thing. The way that they perform it is another thing. But the sort of the precedence that is built up to this point is valuable, and I think that uh, they're really getting they're poking right at the heart of like why extreme metal appeals to me. It's not pop music. It it is like a violent act, and it's still music though. So all those things kind of, uh, at first I was pretty excited about it, but then I felt like it just kept getting more enjoyable the more time I spent with it. And so this is just exactly my kind of thing. I owned all of the records from this band. So, take it with a grain of salt in terms of the score. Scores don't really mean anything. It's just how I would recommend the record. So what matters is I think that if you're not familiar with this band, it's it they could quickly become a favorite of yours if you enjoy classic black metal, thrash metal, and death metal in the context of the late '80s and how that developed beyond, uh, with the trends and best-selling bullshit kind of out of mind. Apart from just the big classics that have been raped by capitalism over time. So for me, probably the best record of this year. There might be another contender there in the back of my head, but it'll, first or second place isn't bad with me. It's basically the same thing. Um, so yeah, again, read the details for yourself. See how you feel about it and give it a listen. And yeah, that's all for me.